right, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're calling from. Looks like we have quite a few people here today from many different regions. My name is Ari Brown. I'm the head of the North American sales team. We have Randy Schneider here today with us, who's one of our Sigmatek automation developers. He'll be joining us here in a second for today's webinar on SigmaNEST console. If you're an existing customer, thank you for using SigmaNEST. If you're not, thank you for showing interest in our solution. Now, today's SigmaNEST goes well beyond nesting and tooling, tool pathing for the many machines that we support. We have developed technology that connects different areas of the fabrication process. SigmaNEST has the tools and resources to build your smart factory today. As it becomes more and more vital to the areas of the shop, to all areas of the shop, to be connected and passing data as freely and as openly as possible, we're working with our customers to provide a software solution to manage all the data. We want to take advantage of that data to drive every shop to be more efficient and successful. When the schedule goes wrong, it gets painful and quickly. Today, Randy will show us how the machine console tool can be used to react much faster on the fly to changes in demand. Randy will open up today's discussion with a technical overview and show how a typical customer will leverage this automation. Please hold your questions until he is finished with the technical portion. He will answer any questions and provide deeper insights into the areas that you have of interest. And with that, I'll turn it over to Randy.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. Machine console is a concept that it started over 20 years ago. The application's been in existence for quite a while. It's a just-in-time nesting system. It's typically leveraged by companies that don't necessarily want to do offline programming. They don't want to nest ahead of time and then basically have all those sheets and so on queued up to be run on the machine. Instead, what they want it to have is a more flexible environment in which to work in, where because you've got things such as some of the points that are to be shown here, re-nesting hot jobs that might disrupt the current production. These are maybe jobs that are introduced late in the game, where they have a due date even as much as this afternoon. And instead, because you've done offline programming ahead of time, all that programming in that is already baked in. And so instead, what they would do is nest in the environment just when they need the work. And they can be run in any number of ways. They could dictate maybe one sheet at a time, 2 sheets, and so on. The other pain points that customers use that are having issues, they may use remnant management. The remnant management a lot of times will get out of whack, meaning that basically remnants that people are in the office necessarily nesting on, they no longer exist on the floor. Somebody's taken that remnant and run off to the shearer with it, cut it up, and now it doesn't exist. The people in the office are unaware of this. So basically now they're having to run back to the office, take that, re-nest it on something else. Instead, if you're running in a just-in-time environment with machine console, they're only running the remnants that are presented before them right at the machine. So you can either run with necessarily remnants that currently exist that you can see, or if you're not even using remnant management at all, they can actually just type in the remnant size and say nest on it. The other thing that this application kind of helps eliminate are issues regarding employee attendees and their attendances. If they don't show, then necessarily, I mean, really what you need in essence is to have a machine operator that necessarily knows how to run the machine. Machine console can be trained to somebody within minutes, 5 minutes or so. They can be up and running without necessarily, with minimal training. The other thing is in SigmaNEST, having somebody necessarily trained in SigmaNEST, there are quite a few steps involved. Machine Console simplifies this. It allows you to basically train somebody that is maybe an operator of another machine, but also knows the laser. They can be moved over, shown in 5 minutes. Now I'm up and programming. And with very few steps and so on. So next. The benefits, again, some of the immediate benefits are, running hot jobs as needed. Work that's necessarily due that afternoon can be presented to Machine Console via the business system. If you're using SimTrans, this is pushed in. And as soon as that becomes a work order in this business system and then presented to SimTrans, if it's presented to SigmaNEST, it's available for nesting. It could be the very next, in essence, you could take an order in the office and it could be the next thing presented to the machine within minutes. The other benefits that I get a lot here are rework jobs. Work that basically is presented at the end of the machine. There could be flaws in the machine, in the sheet, where basically they have to scrap a part. If you're using this in conjunction with color offload, that part can be rejected, and then it's immediately up to be presented to Machine Console to be nested on a remnant and so on and moved on its way. That way you're basically getting all the work you need presented and done versus scrapping the work, going back to the office and saying that I need this nested for the machine to keep the work flowing. The using remnants immediately, we kind of discussed this a little bit already. The remnants, again, are a touchy subject with a number of customers because it does demand a good deal of disciplines and so on, and making sure that that those remnants exist and that somebody isn't taking them, that in essence they're quarantined to that department so that it doesn't cause unneeded work ahead of time for nesting in the office. Again, the programming, the necessarily training time for Machine Console is minimal. The biggest advantage, I think, in some cases for Machine Console is the customization of it. It can be as loosely connected to business logic as you want it to be, or deeply entrenched into the business logic where basically the operator that can't run anything other than within the confines of Machine Console. There could be business rules such as nesting based on size. Certain contours necessarily on the parts have to be processed on a router, for instance. They could have to be processed in a reversed climb milling scenario where the console can be programming and basically interrogating parts to set all of this up in preparation for nesting. Laser is the same thing. You could actually have the thing dictate part size and how that would necessarily run part spacings for smaller parts. The other thing too is remnant management. Remnant management, it could be set up so that it nests remnants first by rule, or nests remnants last based on what your preferences are. What you're looking at now are some of the things that we do when we're interrogating parts, just kind of some things that we've had in the past. There's corrections in geometry, contour directions, and so on can be without somebody interrogating the parts in the office. Based on your business rules, we can set that up, and as Machine Console is presented with this work, it basically goes in and builds in those business rules. Filler parts is another one. Filler parts could be a situation where filler parts are always presented to the Machine Console, where if there's additional material at the tail end of the run, that those filler parts are automatically basically interjected in to fill out the last sheet, so that you basically, instead of having remnant management at all, you have no remnants to deal with. But those are typically customers that are using some sort of Kanban process and so on. The filler parts could be done with production parts as well. We'll discuss a little bit in a few minutes about some of the nesting rules that are built into machine console that can be opened up. The other selection is how many jobs can be selected, how many and when those jobs are selected. Machine console can be set up too that you may have an environment where that you've got, let's say 60 days worth of work presented to machine console, but you only want machine console and that operator only presented with a certain number of days worth of work. It could be just that day where it shows them everything that's up against that day's basically due dates. And then again, this is a setting that's within machine console that can be changed without any Sigmatek interaction. This is basically a setting within the machine console to open up what I consider to be a production window. So, okay, move on, Ari. So what I'm going to present here a little bit is a day in a life of the machine operator, somebody that might be running machine console. Keep in mind, we do have some customers that actually run machine console from the office, in that they may be producing for the next day's work, just as they do now, but they want those people to work with a system that the rules are built in. The people that are nesting are not making the rules. It's necessarily how the business wants to run. So one of the things that we'll do now is we'll go through a quick little demo of a day in a life of what that operator would be doing at the machine. So here what you see is machine console. The operator now is presented with the work on the left-hand side. You can see that it's automatically selected by the select materials. It's nesting from the hottest jobs by due date. So on the left-hand side, you see the work that's presented is within a certain number of days. In this case, I have this completely opened up to like 90 days. I can constrain it more, but for the case of the demo, it opened up to everything. They select the sheets that are currently showing, the stock sheets. The operator selects nest only, does the interrogation, and starts to nest. So then the operator is presented with the last sheet. At this point, the operator has the ability to make a decision. Do I want to kick off the parts on the last sheet, or go and then process the other sheets? In this case, you can see there's 6. In this case, he decides, I'm going to go ahead and process that last sheet and the subsequent other sheets and then move on. So in this case, now they're presented with the remnants. You can see that the operator selected to keep the last sheet's remnant, and now it's going to post. And now that code and its subsequent 6 layouts are presented to the machine. And just down below, you can kind of see the color offload, where it's actually thrown those nests out to the tail end of the machine on color offload. I'll actually do a demo here in a few minutes on color offload on when you're using color offload in conjunction with SigmaNEST and machine console. So the next thing it does is it requeries after it's posted. Requeries, then presents with the next subset of materials that are hot. The operator selects, they pick the sheets at the top. And you can see down below there were remnants actually that were available. But in this case, we're going to kind of hold off on nesting those remnants. We do have options built into the application for automatically selecting remnants and nesting those at either the tail end of the run to try them at the tail end, or actually nest those remnants first at the front end to consume the remnants, get them out of stock, and move on with full sheets. These are options that are already built into Machine Console. Typically what we do is we'll typically have a bit of a discussion with the customer about the discovery that discusses in detail what are to be those business rules that Machine Console is to live under. The Machine Console can actually also be manipulated such that one machine could be set aside for production, while the other machine, you could have another machine on the other side of the shop that's used mainly for rapid response work, where production's done on one machine, then anything that's rejected could be pushed off to the rapid response cell. So in this case, now you're seeing the operator go through, he looks at the results, he sees the last sheet and says, oh, you know what, I don't necessarily want to run those particular parts on that sheet. So in this case, he rejects the last sheet, and now those parts are going to be kicked off off the layout, and then the subsequent prior sheets are going to be nested, auto NC'd, and posted. So as you're going to see, what Machine Console will then do is, because I kicked those parts off the last sheet, it's going to now requery, and you can see now within that same material, it's now showing that those parts were kicked off and are still needed. So in this case, what we're going to do, as you can see, I selected to nest on stock sheets, and instead, we're going to select the remnants at the bottom, and nest those remaining parts on a selected group of remnants. And then, because we're using use best sheet, it will select the best remnant that's available at the time. And again, this is only one option for how to handle the remnants. It can be hard coded in necessarily. It's not hard coded, but there's options behind the config within Machine Console to build in some additional remnant rules. So it'll present that last sheet, and the operator has the option here, and instead now we're going to present or process. Process as is means to necessarily auto NC with the preferred options for auto NC within SigmaNEST and post to the machine. Okay, that mode that you saw there was what we call partial automation, where partial automation, what it does is it nests down whatever sheets necessarily you're telling it to, one sheet, two sheets, all sheets. In essence, it'll basically, if you indicate in there that I want to run two sheets, it'll run two sheets, and then either it'll run two sheets until it runs out of parts that are required, or it just basically nests two sheets and stops. So next thing I'm going to show here is Machine Console in conjunction with color offload. This is the optimal environment, if you ask me, necessarily. If I was running it, if I had Machine Console at the front end and color offload at the tail end, in a paperless world now, I don't have to print out layout details and so on. Color offload is now presented with all the layouts that were currently nested with Machine Console, presented at the tail end of the machine via color offload. So they have options at that point to be able to reject parts For instance, we talked about that already for a part that may necessarily have a sheet that has a big scuff across it, where they can reject that part outright, and then now it's presented back to machine console. Okay, so let's run the video. So here you're presented with and shown, this is what would be running at the tail end of the machine with color offload. This color offload typically is used at the offload station. It could either be presented as to the operator, or it could be an offload station altogether. It could be a separate table where they've offloaded, and now that person is just going through the sheets and deciphering what's going on with those layouts. So what you see now is that last sheet that we nested. The operators realize that there's a scuff in the sheet. So in this case, he's going to select the parts that you see on the screen. He selects that part that has the scuff, and he's now presented that the flaw that was in there was a flaw in the sheet. So at this point now in the process is he does an update to the program. That update, what that does is it signals to SigmaNEST that that program is completed. So it's completed with that rejection as the last part. So as you saw before, that part was finishing number is 344. Okay, so now to be able to look at this in a real-time situation is that I've rejected the part. Now the operator, next slide. Now what you're going to see is that part is now rejected, and so the operator now needs to get that part out. That part needs to move on to the next operation. Let's say, for instance, it's got forming and so on, and instead of going back to the office saying that, hey, I need to finish this out, I instead of necessarily going and finishing the work out with one missing, I need to finish it out in its entirety. I can't ship short. So in this case, we'll run a video here. What that process would be, the operator comes back to the console, he does a refresh of the work, and as he refreshes the work, you see that the part has been pinpointed by machine console that, hey, I still have this part remaining. So now the operator says, okay, well, I realize now I have a sheet off to the side that it's a remnant that is not necessarily in SigmaNEST. So what I'm moving to here is a user-defined sheet where the user basically puts in the sheet size that's sitting before him instead of necessarily adding a remnant to SigmaNEST. What this will do is it'll create that remnant in SigmaNEST automatically, and it will nest on that size. Present the sheet, and the operator now says, okay, well, I need the part, let's move on, let's process as is. So even now I can go in and say, okay, well, now I have a remnant of a remnant. So he rejects the remnant that the part is sitting on. They don't want to keep that, but they do want to keep the tail end of that piece as a remnant now, and now that remnant is now in SigmaNEST to be used at a later date. So once it's done, obviously you see there it says, okay, well, now I'm going to requery immediately, and it's going to present the next subset of work based on due date. Keep in mind too, when it's requerying each time, what it's doing is, if I had parts within the process window that they could be ranging from, 1 day to 10 weeks if necessary. But if your process window is 2 days, it's going to present you with the work that for the hottest part within that day. So you could have one part, for instance, that is due today, The others are not due till tomorrow. So what Machine Console does is it presents you with what it considers to be the hottest material, and that hottest material is that hottest part within that material grade and thickness sub-range. Next. So what you saw before was basically a partial automation mode. Partial automation means, again, it's presented to the operator with some nuance decision making that needs to happen. So on the fly within Machine Console, I can quickly move from that. If I don't want that operator making those decisions, I just simply want all my business logic built into the full automation. Next slide. There's a setting that you can move to within Machine Console. We'll show it here. This could be, typically it's password protected, typically because it needs to be protected so that the operator you may not want them to make the decision. Here I'm showing that number of days functionality. You can change that window that it's looking at. So this case, I'm going to move to full automation from within the settings. Close the config. And now what you should see is Machine Console's buttons and the configuration of the buttons will change. It moves into a full automation mode. So now you can see the only thing available to the operator is the nest and NC, or what we considered or call continue nesting. The operators then, if the work is queried, the operator picks the work, selects the sheets that they want to be presented with, or they want to present the Machine Console. And in this case, you can see I've actually selected some stock sheets, and I'm going to include remnants this time. Machine Console is typically used, and again, within your business logic, it uses what we call use best sheet functionality. So some of the things that you're seeing interrogated for, one of the options you see there is large part functionality. This is a good description of necessarily some of the things that we can build into console that don't exist in SigmaNEST. That large part evaluation is something that SigmaNEST doesn't do for you. SigmaNEST in itself, when you're nesting offline, that programmer has to nest down on sheets, and then they have to evaluate that all those sheets get nested, that all the parts necessarily get nested. Well, if there's a part that's larger than the sheets, SigmaNEST just simply won't nest it. It doesn't tell you that it's not nested. You have to go and see that in essence, that the quantity nested equals the quantity that was required. In this case, Machine Console, with it built in, it will interrogate those parts and forewarn the operator that, hey, you're nesting on sheets necessarily that aren't conducive to nesting this job in its entirety. There's other functionality, again, that can be built in that will interrogate each of the work orders to make sure that all of that work order completes, if that's in your business logic. So in this case, again, it will always at the tail end go and present the last sheet. And as you can see, it's done all the stuff that we had done before, where it nested, then stopped and paused, waited for a decision. In this case, no decision was made. It was nested, auto-NC'd, and posted. So now that is actually available to the machine and sitting at the end. Typically, the way that Machine Console is used is that it's done kind of internal to the process. Internal to the process meaning that the operator may nest down the first subsequent sheets that he's going to run that day. Then while those sheets are running, that's when he's coming back to Machine Console and actually maybe posting out maybe 1 or 2 sheets at a time if necessary, to keep it even more in a just-in-time environment. So given that, what we would like to do at this point is kind of open discussion up to the various attendees and that to see if there's any questions that you guys might have.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Is that you, Chris?
Yes, I can hear. Question, now this works in conjunction, correct, with SimTrans and Mulatto, if configured correctly. Say, we do everything from production planning end. So if the production planners wanted to use this to increase the efficiency of the nesting, we can go ahead and do that and then post out to the machines and have them change the order or do as we wish, or just give them the order so they can burn it, can increase the efficiency of the production planning end.
Okay, so on the production planning end, if you're using this in conjunction with let's say that are on the business side, are you basically setting down the due dates and so on to be?
No, we simply send the planners the NC.
Okay.
Oh. But for us in production planning, like you said, it will discriminate of if it's too big for us, we're heavy plate. So it would be too big for the plate, or we could have other orders that it could find that data in that we could add to our larger plate and then cut them all and just, instead of having remnants, have everything nested on that plate and increase the efficiency of the burn per NC.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so the way that some people, again, this is when we would come in and do this discovery with you. Basically what we do with the customer is that if their business rule is that we release the work, and okay, so let's say for instance, that process window is such that I'm looking at 3 days worth of work. The operator can actually go in and select like everything because it was presented that material or the jobs that you saw there, the operator could just basically select today's dates work. Then what can actually happen is that the buttons that you're seeing for nesting, the rule could be necessarily that it nests down everything for today. And then basically what it does is it opens up the next day's work if there's available materials left over. Let's say that today's work encompassed 2 sheets, but at the tail end of that second sheet, there's 30–40% of the material left. That with that business rule, you could actually tell Machine Console that, hey, let's open up that window just for this nest that next day and bring in the next day's work into that nest as the filler parts.
That's fantastic. Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, sure. Those types of questions, in essence, that's a good one, because again, it kind of makes a bit of the discussion happen that Machine Console out of the box may not necessarily run exactly how you operate. If you have a pie in the sky idea as to how I want Machine Console to operate, we don't necessarily have, in this case, like he said, he may not have filler parts to fill in for that last sheet, and they don't want to create remnants. So in this case, we're going to use the next day's production as filler parts. The other things that I've been asked in the past too was, instead of necessarily, when you open up that next day, I don't want to nest and end up with partial work, because then if you nest and you only have partial work, you've got those parts basically sitting off the end of the machine. Either you have to wait till the next day for that material to run and then nest that work down of that material grade and thickness, or you basically build it in the Machine Console that filler part rule is such that I don't want you to nest on that last sheet unless you're going to nest that work order, that required work order, to its entirety. So I only want that work on that sheet if it's nested in its entirety. I don't want partial in-process work.
So Randy, this is Ari. How would you start a project like that? What's your recommendation that, just kind of the process of acquiring the console technology?
Typically, I mean, machine console, I mean, in essence, it's a fit for almost anybody, even if you're doing offline programming. Again, if you're a company that if you don't want somebody in the office necessarily nesting and then spending, hours on end trying to get one more part on the sheet. In essence, there's enough other work that needs to be done in SigmaNEST with getting parts in. It's more value-oriented work in a lot of cases. I want to get the parts into SigmaNEST with its current nesting rules, all of that stuff laid out properly, so that when those parts are available, that SigmaNEST or Machine Console and SigmaNEST in conjunction are giving its best effort at the machine. And all those, again, it becomes more cohesive for that person to spend the value of their time in, again, applying nesting rules, getting geometry in. Typically, what I would do, Ari, is I would have again, the discovery visits are nice. Because basically what we do at that time is we go through the process with you of what is conducive to your environment. You may have a machine that basically is running an FMS system, where you have an FMS that has a tower and maybe 3 lasers or 2 lasers in there. You can even run it in some cases where one machine is designated as a thicker plate machine. Machine Console can be set up such that it will route that work just in time to that machine based on thickness. So these are the rules that we kind of want to discuss with the customer and to get in place when using Machine Console. I mean, I've had requests even for customers where they're nesting for an environment where they've got 5 lasers, and 3 of those lasers are in another portion of the shop. Well, they're basically nesting ahead of time, making programs, and then they're taking programs out to the floor and using something like load manage to push and level load across those machines. And one of the things that Machine Console can be set up for is basically the work is now, instead of scheduling that work, just leave it open. Leave it completely open to everybody. That any machine can then pull that work and nest on it. As soon as that machine grabs the work, that work order is locked to that machine. So instead of pushing programs to each machine, that work it's more or less a pull system. That machine pulls that work, nests it, it locks the other machines out from that work, because otherwise you don't want this other machine across the shop to be running the same work order. So now you've got to marry all those parts up. In this case, basically a scheduler doesn't have to worry about the schedule. I just say I want to run it on a laser. That work is nested on that machine, locked, finished on that machine, and then the other lasers basically are taking other work in and nesting to keep that flow moving. That particular mode, if that machine, what happens if that work gets locked? There is a mode in which that work can be freed up. In Machine Console, there's a button that when they're in that mode, that they can basically free that work up, releasing it back to the other machines, for instance, to nest out that work in its entirety. So I've not found an occasion yet where we can't work out something that is conducive to the environment for each customer. Hopefully that kind of answers your question, Ari. I mean, again, it's one of those things that a discovery is definitely in this case needed for just about anybody that might be using Machine Console, because we act typically like it's a Kaizen. In some cases, they start asking questions, the basic questions, why are we doing what we're doing in that environment? In a lot of cases, when we introduce machine console, it changes the environment of the shop. They start working entirely different than they had in the past. It becomes a lot more, scrap rates go down, utilization of remnants increasingly gets better. There's not so much noise in the system of nesting ahead of time, only to find out we don't have those sheets available to us. So there's few downsides to running machine console.
Chris had an interesting point when he asked the questions about the SimTrans and the communications, back to the host business system. Can you expand a little bit on the benefits there of just-in-time, production and how that will help, sharing that information back to your business system?
Yeah, if basically if you're using machine console too, the color offload, it actually helps and assists in this greatly, because SimTrans basically is the mechanism by which the work is now loosely connected to your business system. That work is released. SimTrans brings that work into SigmaNEST and is immediately available. We could discuss a little bit about how that work could be presented to SigmaNEST without making it available. But in this case, it's now available. The machine console nests it down. It runs on the machine. On the tail end, when that program update process occurs, what happens is that signals to the SigmaNEST that work is now completed. There's a workflow in SigmaNEST that basically there's a quantity required, there's a quantity in process meaning that it's nested and it's posted code to the machine, and now it's awaiting processing. So color offload is the tail end of that has to happen to basically do the update, which moves it into a complete state. That complete state then, if you're using SimTrans, basically what happens is we do feedback. That data is now, once that's completed, that data is presented back for the business system to be able to pick up and process back, stating that I've nested this particular material, these parts were on that material. The other thing that could do is it could be also used to actually close out that operation. The business system can pull that data back in and close that operation if necessary. But because you're nesting with SigmaNEST, we have it as good if you're looking for the best costing available at the time, most of the business systems typically are showing and displaying that this is the amount of materials. It's an estimate in a lot of cases via the item masters within the business system. When SigmaNEST is nested, that's a true cost, because we're basically feeding back to the business that if a part, for instance, takes up 80% of the sheet, that scrap is dispersed appropriately based on size. So small parts don't get necessarily dinged for the scrap as much as a large part, because the large part takes up the brunt of the sheet. Those smaller parts get that distribution better. So now you're getting the cost dispersed back to the business system appropriately. The option for not using color offload, by the way, is that the programs typically, that the next process is that somebody sends out a layout detail. That layout detail has to be communicated back to the guys in the shop office or something like that said we ran these programs, and then they have to do the updates themselves. So in this case, it kind of suits many purposes by using color offload in conjunction with machine console.
So this is really good information, Randy. I'm sorry to be kind of hogging all the questions, but I got one more question.
Yeah.
If a customer out there already has the SimTrans and killer offload, this seems like the natural progression or the next step, in the SigmaNEST journey is this console. It seems like it'd be very easy for them to acquire this technology. Any thoughts on that?
It is. I mean, basically, a current customer, it's sometimes easier to implement a machine console because that customer already has a lot of the business rules that they may be using, like they're doing set as defaults within the task parameters for nesting with various clearances based on material grades and thicknesses. Auto NC, a lot of that stuff is already established within the business or within SigmaNEST. So moving to machine console is a natural progression because now machine console can be told, I don't want to hard code in and process wall files and batch and through API calls to produce the business logic. In essence, you can make a change in your task parameters in SigmaNEST or the Auto NC and how that thing is running that particular material grade and thickness for that machine, and it's inherited immediately by the machine console. So the setup and so on that's needed necessarily from all that business rules that are in SigmaNEST isn't necessarily needed for a current customer because all that's pretty much established. And then, by the way, when we're talking about those business rules, like the set as default stuff within SigmaNEST, we don't even need to necessarily use that. I've had cases where the business rules were such that I don't want anybody in the office to dictate what's happening on the floor. We can actually have those business rules set up and established within the machine console, and then any changes they may make in the office don't take effect. Somebody has to actually change it in the machine console. So, any technical questions you might have, feel free to give me a call anytime to discuss how it might be used for you. With that said,
yeah, Randy, we appreciate your time today, Randy. Thank you so much. We know that you're definitely one of the leading experts in this area of automation. And to the folks out there, we appreciate your interest in today's webinar on SigmaNEST Console, and we'll be scheduling future webinars the third Wednesday of each month going through the 2023 year, and we look forward to seeing you all real soon.